So I think we might make a start. And so, tēnā koutou katoa, nā mihi nui ki a koutou. Ke te waikato e whakatupu au, no kirikiri roa aho, ko Jennifer Curtin toko ingoa, tēnā koutou katoa. So welcome everyone to the first of a series of policy forums that will be hosted as webinars through the Public Policy Institute. My name's Jennifer Curtin and I'm the director of the Public Policy Institute, but I'm also working on a gender responsive analysis and budgeting project sponsored by MB here at the University of Auckland with some other scholars. So hence our interest in this eve before the budget on what COVID-19 means for women workers. We intentionally called it women workers because while we know that we should distinguish between paid and unpaid work, actually in the context of COVID, these two facets of our lives have become much more connected than perhaps we've seen before. So it's our aspiration to connect the public policy with communities of women who have an interest in policy issues that impact their lives. And normally we would do this ka nohi ki te kanohi, but this is not a normal environment. And so the e-space and the webinar is what we are planning to use to connect with you on some issues over the next 6 months. In a sense, this might be considered a type of a waka that's taking us on this journey in a not normal time. Before introducing our 4 expert speakers, just got a couple of housekeeping matters for those that have joined us. So we don't have a chat function on this webinar. Instead, you have the option of using the Q&A button to type up a question for our speakers, and you can upvote those questions. So if someone's already asked a question that you really like, just click on the like button and that will raise that question to the top. Please try and keep your written questions short. That will make it easier for us to identify them. Secondly, I'd just like to say that we're recording this. This is so that those women out there and others who are interested in this topic can listen to our esteemed speakers later if they can't make it on at this afternoon tea hour when children are getting ready to have baths and various other things. We've asked our speakers to talk for 8 to 10 minutes. I'm going to pick up my very red phone and wave it at them at the 8-minute mark. And that should leave us some time for about 3 to 4 questions at the end. But we will be keeping a copy of all your questions. So if yours doesn't get answered, we're going to work out a way to respond collectively to those after the event. So all of that aside, it now gives me great pleasure to introduce our 4 speakers. They're going to go in order of the program. So we have Saunoamaali'i Kararina Sumeo from the Human Rights Commission. She's our Equal Employment Opportunities Commissioner and extremely knowledgeable on the topic of women workers, the gender pay gap and everything else that matters to us, women who are undertaking paid and unpaid work. Traci Houpapa, who's chair of the National Advisory Council on the Employment of Women and the Federation of Māori Authorities, and came recommended to us by the Ministry for Women because she has amazing experience across both sectors of government and industry. So we're really honoured to have you with us, Traci. Kia ora. Andrea Black, who's Policy Director and Economist at the NZCTU, New Zealand Council of Trade Unions. Thank you, Andrea. And Rebecca Barnes-Clarke, who's a Policy Director in Economics and International for the Ministry for Women. So we have a wonderful array here of insights, and we're focusing on today the kinds of challenges that COVID-19 has brought to the lives of women workers, but also what the post-COVID investment strategies and other kickstarting of the economy might mean for women workers. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Saunoamaali'i. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, tēnā koutou wahine mā, talofa lava, māloilelei, everyone. And thank you very much, Jennifer, for the invitation to me and the Human Rights Commission to come on board. Tō ko Saunoamaali'i, Kararina Sumeo, ahau, ko Ngati Hā tuku iwi, ko moana nui a kiwa tuku moana. Ko Komisina Equal Employment Opportunities, ahau, mo te kahui te tangata. I am the Equal Employment Opportunities Commissioner for the Human Rights Commission. So welcome everyone. And also I want to acknowledge our panelists, Traci, Houpapa, Andrea Black, and Rebecca Barnes-Clarke. It's an honor to be at this table with you all. So welcome to you too as well. In terms of the crisis, I mean, as we all know, this has been absolutely extraordinary. It's affected almost every human right. It's touched every human right almost of our people in a very short time. And we know that some of that has been very devastating for some of our families. You know, we already knew that the world wasn't equal for our women. And even less so, if we break that down, if we look at Māori women, Pacific women, our ethnic minority, disabled women, our older women, it was never an equal playing field. So of course, when the crisis hit, everything is exacerbated. Our issues have become more and more difficult. Certainly in terms of, you know, it's been mixed impacts on our different women, and I'll try as much as I can not to talk generally. So, you know, certainly in terms of Pacific women, it's been a time when we've appreciated our spiritual well-being, our connectedness with each other, and our cultural identity. A couple of days ago, I saw there's a South Auckland group where they, you know, send out messages around COVID, and there's a message of, and there's a picture of Pacific Island cops dancing on one side of the fence, and you had people on the other side playing the ukulele, dancing with her. I mean, that was beautiful. And that's what I mean when we come to realize how valuable our cultural identity and our connectedness with each other is. Certainly in terms of our women workers, our ethnic minority groups, this is a worrying time for those who are on temporary visas or short-term visas. You know, some of them have raised families here, they've built their lives here, and now they're worried about their jobs. You know, are they going to get a renewed visa? Will there be a time when New Zealand will say, thank you very much, but we don't need you anymore? That's a real stress right now. And of course, we have others here who are not entitled to Social Security support and that sort of thing. So that's a big worry. Of course, for our disabled women and women working in healthcare, the issue of PPE, of course, has been in the media almost every day. You know, that right to be safe in your work really came under strain during this crisis, and we could probably say it's still under strain, you know, for some of our women working in the health sector. For rural women, I had an interesting discussion with Fiona Gava, who said, you know, lucky they have land, they have space. So in terms of social distancing, they don't have the worries that we have, but one of the big things for them, of course, is isolation. And of course, lack of broadband and internet, which we kind of take for granted in urban centers, even though there are patchy areas, but in urban centers, we've taken that for granted, that we've had internet and that we even have a laptop that works. And that's not even a choice for some of our women, you know, and you're wanting to enter into the workforce going forward. If you don't have access to those things, then that's an issue that policy people should look at, ensuring that people do. Very informative contact with Māori Women's Welfare League, very similar issues in terms of hardship. One of the issues that came up there was, you know, the safety of our women in our homes. You know, family violence continues to be an issue for all our women, including our Māori whānau. So lots of issues there, but you know, also we saw the resilience of women through this time. whether they're working at the supermarkets or working, you know, as essential workers in other places. We saw their resilience, and they're still able to show joy when I talk with them. And if anything, in terms of our women in paid work, and I won't go to unpaid work at the moment, but in our paid work, one of the things that really stood out to me was the power and the importance of unions and union membership for our women in paid work. And it's really come out as not only were the unions fighting for the rights of women who were in the unions, but as a result, it offered that protection for other women who weren't in the unions. But that is a real area of concern for New Zealand. And certainly in terms of policy, that's an area that we should look at, because without that protection, again, the previous vulnerabilities and inequities that existed before would have just been worse for women who weren't part of unions. So that's something that's really, really important. And that whole principle of good faith, you know, COVID didn't lock that down. That's still alive. There's no exceptions for that. But obviously there were some businesses who perhaps thought they were doing their best, but but probably fell short of it. And I'll give you an example. I had a Samoan woman who's an immigrant here. She was sick, and she got an email from the employer saying, this is what's going to happen, you know, your hours are going to be cut, etc., etc. So perhaps in the eyes of the employer, they'd done their thing, they'd written, they'd given notice, but this is a woman whom English is a second language. I wouldn't consider that proper consultation. I would not consider that a practice in good faith. So, you know, lots of these issues have been popping up. And of course, we've had a couple of issues, older workers saying, why have I been considered for redundancy? I didn't offer to stop work. You know, there are issues like that. Or someone who's got a health issue, and all of a sudden, you know, they've been considered for redundancy. So, you know, there are questions of discrimination. We know that that's against the law. So all those rights to work, right to equal opportunity, right to be safe, right to social security, they haven't changed. We haven't lost those under COVID. And now it's a time for us to make sure that we adhere to those commitments as duty bearers, whether you're running a business or whether you're in government. It's really important right now as we're shaping those policies, as you said, Jennifer, going forward. This is not the time to let go of those things that we all fought and women have fought so hard for over the history of New Zealand. This is not the time to loosen up and let that go. You know, within days, we've changed policies, we've moved money to support businesses, to support the economy. Within days, we did that. For years and years, women have trying to fight for the most basic things. And so we cannot let that go. So we want to do better moving forward. So clearly, I mean, we've got shovel-ready projects, as we all know. And I was looking at thinking, what are they going to do in construction and infrastructure and green technology? What are they going to do to get more women in, to get our young people in, our older workers in who can't get in? You know, how are they going to upskill them if they're not already in the street to get in? How, you know, it's no point having a politics somewhere we've got to drive for miles, you know, to get there. It's just not possible. You know, even in those industries, how can we make flexible work or working from home possible so that we can create those opportunities? Or someone, say, who's disabled, who doesn't own a car, who doesn't have a driver's license, to still participate in those industries, but working from home. I mean, you know, there are lots of opportunities like that we can think, if we want to, and we've chosen that we want to do something, we do it in this country. And that's one of the things that's come out of this response, is seeing women take leadership, because they do think differently, they do talk and communicate differently, and that's been a really positive thing. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Kia ora, thank you so much. And if we were all unmuted, we would all be clapping right now. So I'll just do that for you and hand over to Traci.
Tēnā rā tātou katoa me ngā mihi I rungi ngā huatanga te wā. An absolute pleasure to spend the last parts of this afternoon and today with such an esteemed panel, and also to see some of the great questions coming through. I'm really pleased to be participating in a conversation and a discussion around women and work and what COVID-19 means for us. Because I think, to quote my grandmother, there's a silver lining in this dark cloud. You know, I've been accused of talking about COVID-19 in positive terms because it gives us an opportunity to reset the paradigm for our economy, for Aotearoa New Zealand, and to highlight the important role that we as women leaders, whether that's leading from our kitchens and our dining rooms and our homes, or boardrooms or businesses or offices across the country and the world. I think we have an important part to play in the new narrative, the new conversation, the new storytelling and messaging that's coming out. And I think it's incumbent upon people who are sitting at tables and making decisions around strategy and policy to make space for our other wahine to do that. McKinsey have called COVID-19 and pandemics and crises such of this nature as both amplifier and an accelerator. So it gives us the opportunity to have another look, another lens on what we already have and think about what's going really well. And then to think about those areas that we perhaps want to either reframe, ignore, or refuse. And that's where we're up to right now. I think the important part, and you're seeing it internationally with the women who are leading countries, communities, and nations through the COVID crisis, that our women are more instinctively, intuitively, and decidedly putting women and communities at the centre of decision making. Now, whether that's right or wrong has yet to bear fruit, but the fact is that this crisis is affecting our families and our communities. And we know, and our colleague earlier spoke about the resilience of women, that's what is going to get us through. Chairing the National Advisory Council on the Employment for Women gives me the opportunity to sit alongside of some learned people, some accomplished business people, and industry leaders and social and community and cultural leaders. And some of the advice that we have been talking about over this last, feels like longer, but really it's only a handful of weeks, isn't it? Has really been talking about how we consider new policy, new legislation to ensure that our women workers, whether that is paid or unpaid work, are afforded the same consideration in terms of workplace conditions, opportunities, support, resources, training and development. Now that's a big long shopping list there, but the fact is that this is a unique opportunity to rebuild how and what we are doing with our economy. There has been a lot of conversation in this term of government around progressing equal pay, the Equal Pay Amendment Bill, which I personally and professionally support, and also public service legislation. There are a number of pieces of legislation, regulation, policy that can be revised, rewritten, and adjusted and adapted to consider the role of women workers. We think about industry, and knowing with my background in agribusiness and primary industry, we're starting to reimagine what the food and fibre strategy looks like for Aotearoa Inc. because we know, and it feels like a little bit of a step backwards to go forwards, that the world needs food and it needs fibre, and New Zealand's good at that. We can improve the role of leadership in terms of leadership, management and ownership for women in the primary industry, and that's certainly the conversation that we've been having over this last little while. If we think about what COVID-19 does in terms of amplifying, we know that at the end of March this year, Māori unemployment rates were double that of mainstream New Zealand. So around 4.2, generally speaking, for Māori it was double that. If we're looking at an employment rate for New Zealand, and people are, you know, we're looking between double digits up into the early to mid-20s. What that means for Māori and Māori women is devastating. So in the post-COVID worker market, changing our words, we need to be thinking about how we create opportunities for employment and engagement, that recognises the contribution of women, that balances our roles and responsibilities as leaders of homes and families, and provide the necessary framework, architecture, or supports in and around that. So for some of you who are starting to think, well, what does Trace mean there? Really what I'm talking about is more support for childcare, more recognition of flexi work, more ideas of working from home like I am now with my cat growling at the door, trying to get in, my little boy outside swinging in trees, and thinking to ourselves, how do we balance out those commitments? How do we balance out those priorities? Lastly, because I want to make sure we've got time for questions, I'm really interested in how Māori, as a treaty partner, as tangata whenua and mana whenua, and our Pacifica and our immigrant women and wahine can and should work alongside of strategic decision makers, whether that's in Parliament or industry or in our communities across cultures, to rebuild and re-engineer an economy that's right fitted for families, right fitted for all of our people, and where we can share the wealth and well-being for all of our people, regardless of where we came from and where we live. Jennifer, good to talk. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. So now I'm handing over to Andrea.
Kia ora, Jennifer, and welcome and to everyone on the call, and thank you very much for to be part of this group and be part of this these esteemed colleagues on the screen with me. First of all, I really have to tautoko everything that previous speakers have said, and so I'm moving to halfway down my notes, so I might be finished quite quickly. I started the job that I'm in now as Policy Director and Economist for the Council of Trade Unions 4 months ago. So that means I had 2 months unlocked and 2 months locked in the job that I have. And in many ways, I had 2 different jobs. But before I got locked up, I started to look at women employment statistics. And so we all know about the gender pay gap, but I started to become very interested in an indicator that's known as underutilisation. Now that's really kind of a mouthful and uncool, but it includes everyone who doesn't have any paid work, but people who might want more paid work or for various reasons kind of want paid work but are constrained from going in there. And who would have thought there are more women than men in that category? And at February, when the December labour market statistics came out, and that was our 4% unemployment, which was like fantastic, and the Reserve Bank called that full employment, like well done Reserve Bank. That was still 167,000 women who didn't have enough paid work. And that was what success was looking like. Now, the best possible indicators that Treasury had in their recent scenario was that we went to 8% unemployment. So that's almost 350,000 women. And that is a kind of like a gender number gap of about 70,000. So that would be 70,000 more women than men were not getting enough work. And so I feel this is very much the context that we need to go into, and we in the Council of Trade Unions are very concerned that any rebuild is just a restoration of the status quo, and that's come up with the previous 2 speakers. Because as we knew and has become exemplified by looking at our essential workers, we are very much a low-wage economy, and women, and often precarious, and women, unfortunately, are smack bang in the middle of it. I think there's something like 2/3 of the essential workers were women. A large number of them were not earning a living wage, and sure as heck were not having union protection. So thank you very much for that, that call out there. We would really like to see in a brave new COVID world, everybody earning at least the living wage and everyone having the opportunity to negotiate a fair pay agreement. And that we feel would help raise the living standards of women and their children and their families. Now, the other thing that going into our post-COVID world is if we are going from 4% unemployment, which was nirvana, to at best case 8%, there's lots of talk about physical infrastructure as being the way through. And that's awesome. You know, there's no, that's great. There's so much of our physical infrastructure in this country is decayed, and we'd absolutely support that happening. But there's a concept we've been exploring recently, a number of the women who are affiliated to the Council of Trade Unions, and that's the concept of social infrastructure. And we feel that social infrastructure is what keeps us nurtured, keeps us healthy, and is able to reach our potential as human beings. And so who would have thought, let's think about that. Supermarket workers, cleaners, security guards, teachers, doctors, nurses, all of which have been either underpaid for their contribution or have been insufficient resource gone into their areas. So there's a teacher shortage, there's a nurse shortage, the doctors are having a hard time. Nobody who fits in this social infrastructure category is having a great time, and they didn't previously. And then you add in things like the NGOs that were providing social services, who for reasons that are absolutely beyond me, have to rely on philanthropy for a large part of their funding, and philanthropy has dried up. So we would like to see in the coming budget a greater emphasis on supporting and enhancing the social infrastructure, as well as continuing with the pay equity claims to value the work that the women are doing. And alongside in this social infrastructure, part of the education part is if we have got a lot of traditionally male and let's say well-paid jobs coming in as physical infrastructure, we really want to make sure that our girls and women have the training and can access those as well. So that's really a key aspect. Now, the only other particular point or value add that I might have here is to just address the issue of early childhood education, which has aspects of childcare that Traci mentioned, and is also part of social infrastructure. Again, for reasons that are beyond me, compulsory education is, well, it's not brilliantly well funded, but it's predominantly organised and run by the state. Children who are like a day below 5 are put into early childhood education, and the structure there is very, very fragmented. While there's a lot of community-based centres, which is awesome, which particularly would affect Māori and Pacific women and children, the funding is very insecure and fragmented. And we're quite concerned that with a combination of the greater distances that will be needed now for children when the centres open, combined with potentially increased unemployment of people taking their children out of the centres, that there could well be centres closing, and there could well be community centres closing. So the greater choice and with culturally appropriate options going. And so as well as that having an impact on the quality of education for the children, it also means, let's be honest, the women can go to work, or shall we say one partner in a household with children can go into paid work. And so we're very concerned that going into a post-COVID world, there may not, the structures for enabling women to enter paid work may be less, and we'd also like to see an equal lens going on to the social infrastructure in New Zealand, which is quite frankly the bedrock that physical infrastructure and all economic activity rests on. Because if we're not nurtured and our well-being is not cared for and we aren't reaching our potential, all the rest of the stuff becomes de-amplified. And I think that's it from me, Jennifer. I don't know whether you had your red thing up or not, or even what my time is, but that's all I have to add.
Kia ora, thank you, Andrea. That's great. And I'll just put in a plug for a group of us from the Gender Research Analysis and Budgeting Project have a post-budget analysis that we're hoping will be out in one of the online newspapers not too long after the budget, and we're talking about social infrastructure. And the UK Women's Budget Group are a great champion of this concept as well, and have done some terrific work that shows that investment in the care sectors of an economy can produce just as much economic growth as investment in construction sectors. So it sounds like we're all on the same page here. I'm going to hand over to Rebecca.
Kia ora tātou. It's fantastic to be invited along the panel. Ngā mihi nui kia koe, Jennifer, and the University of Auckland. So first things first, I have a very delightful 3.5-year-old, albeit noisy, who's finding something incredibly funny. So if there's a little bit of noise in the background, that will be her laughing, which is nice. So often I end up coming on these panels as the last speaker, as the government, with sort of the, was representing the government with the right of rebuttal. So I'll give, I thought what would be useful would be to sort of outline a few of the things that we're thinking about and that we're seeing as a result of COVID. And I would also just like to take a moment to in support of Traci, because I see this as an opportunity. It's a massive paradigm shift. Been reading through the Q&As as well while others have been talking, and there's a couple of questions in there about what would it take. Well, it's quite a big shift. We operate and we live in a mercantile Anglo-Saxon model, male model. That's what it is. So to change things, and things that I personally feel quite passionate about, you know. If we're measuring gross domestic product, it should be gross domestic product, everything everyone does. It's not gross domestic product, the things that you pay for. But the next step for that, for the likes of the Ministry for Women in Government and thinkers and economists and things like that, is actually, okay, so how do we do this? How do we measure it? How do we make it comparable? Because we always like to compare ourselves to other countries, of course. You know, things like that. How do we measure progress? So that's a really big question. That's a fundamental question. It's and it's actually an exciting question. This is not an exciting time in terms of what it's doing to people in health. And as a few people have said, the shadow pandemic I saw in the question and answers of domestic violence, this is not okay. This has exacerbated a lot of the problems in New Zealand, but we need to take it and use it and really push forward. So similar things to everyone else. So I don't want to go on too much, but you know, we've got women in the most vulnerable sectors of jobs. We've got women with the fewest choices. So being a woman immediately compounds any negative outcomes that you might have within the system, which isn't designed with us in mind, and then everything you add to that, every intersection that you add to that, your ethnicity, your urban-rural divide, able-bodied, disabled people, you know, things like that. So we do start off on a back foot. So the question is we've seen it. It's under the light now. So how do we change it? So some of the things, again, these great Q&As, so I don't want to go on because we can address things specifically, but there's a tendency in New Zealand to look at the like the stuff. So when we're looking at things like the Provincial Growth Fund, Regional Economic Development, it's always about let's build a port in Northland, and so I think there's that interesting dynamic between the political, let's build a port in Northland, and then the official, which is, okay, so we're going to build a port in Northland. How do we get the right people to Northland with the right skills And our part as the Ministry for Women, because we're not a decision maker in these, we're an influencer. So in our role, a lot of it is, okay, so you want to build picking on Northland, want to build a port in Northland, for example, how are you going to get women to work in a port in Northland too? Because it's half the population, right? So we have our unemployment, half of the population is women and girls. If we're not utilising them, then New Zealand's never going to push past the edge of the frontier curve. So we talk a lot about the frontier. How do we push past it? How do we make increase the value chain? Things like that. We talk about a lot. Move up the value chain. Sorry, that's it. But we don't think about the fact that we've got a latent half of everybody who isn't as well utilised. So maybe rather than at the top making that move through in business, how about we think of the whole? And if we make a small change at the bottom with a larger number of people, maybe we will push past through that frontier. Sorry, I'm an economist, so I've immediately gone to frontier curves. But so this is some of the stuff that we're thinking about, and essentially, you know, with the system that we do have, and I'm not saying that it's right or it shouldn't be changed, but also within the system, how do we make changes? You know, the system isn't going to correct itself to write this of its own accord because it has a self-interest in maintaining it the way it is. So we need to recognise that and say, okay, this is what it is, and we either change it or we change the parameters within which we operate in the system to write it. So make those corrections. So it's a little bit like thinking about you know, where the government gets involved, where there's a market failure. In this case, there's a gender failure. You know, we're not utilising women as much as we could or should. So that's quite theoretical, but that's some of the ways that I, for example, think about it in terms of looking at the whole and as a small part of the whole in terms of government, and then you know, being a part of the wider society is how do we actually enact that change. I think we need in government, we need to think of ourselves in terms of we need to think of the social and moral side of things. You know, we've linked heavily on a market model, and I mean, really low wage jobs are a result of a market model where we have a minimum wage. So we need to actually say, as a whole, do we collectively value the idea of a living wage? And if we do, then we actually need to do that and make that change. And it's not about an economic bottom line, it's about a moral or a right thing to do. Just thinking of, in terms of COVID, in particular for the Ministry for Women, sorry, we're really focused on any new initiatives and ideas that are being put up across government, because the last thing we want is to further entrench anything, because we're all working at pace, as we're all sitting here together but separate. It is a little bit harder in Wellington because we all like to get together and talk about things. Is a little bit harder, so just being really careful to make sure that we're engaged across government. And the idea of getting things done quickly around the economy, that we're not forgetting that the economy is made up of capital, but it is also made up of labour, which are people. And there are specific things we should be thinking about when we're thinking about people. You know, sorry, Northland, to pick on Northland again, port's not going to build itself. But I will absolutely stop there. Sorry, I got quite excited and kept talking. But would love to get into some questions.
Great, kia ora. Thank you, Rebecca. So just big shout out to our four speakers for covering off quite a wide ranging of topics. So what I thought is there's been a few that have been upvoted quite significantly here. So what I'm going to do is pose 3 quick questions. I'm going to pull 3 together, top 3, and then I'm going to pass to each of the panelists to to offer, you know, a sort of a 1 to 2 minute spiel on each. So really, if we look at what's being asked here, we've heard something about from all of you about the need to see a paradigm shift from perhaps physical infrastructure to social infrastructure, or perhaps it's about valuing more the social infrastructure work that's already being done. So how do we make this change? How do we see an increased valuing of the social infrastructure work that's already being done? How do we value the unpaid work that the majority of which is being done by women? So how do we put that into the mix in a tangible sense? And how do we encourage the women how do we help the connection between unions and women in the labour market to grow more significantly? I'm just kind of ad-libbing that one. And I'll just add this as a final one. One question's about how do women's organisations in the community how might they contribute to making this change, this shift, this opportunity, if you like, this challenge actually happen? So how do we get them at the decision-making table, which Traci talked about, but what should we also be doing out here in civil society so that the paradigm does shift, so that we're not just going back to business as usual? So I've probably clumped about 4 questions together there. So I'm going to ask somebody to put their hand up. Who wants to go first? Anybody? Shall I just say Traci? Yeah?
Yeah, I'm keen to give it a go. So I think a couple of things. Do you know, under pressure, sometimes we default to what we always know. So when we were talking about, you know, economic stimuli and the idea of shovel-ready came out, I cringed and turned off the television, because immediately that's just you know, we're still thinking about the old thinking and an old approach, or tried and true, instead of thinking about regional economic development, which is what Andrea and Rebecca and we've all talked about, you know, in terms of a heavy upfront investment in childcare, education, training, development for new skills that we will require in this post-COVID economy, which is requiring us to be more sustainable, more environmentally focused, talking about circular economies and so forth. So I think there's that. I think there's another part to the question that says that people who run businesses or lead organisations or chair boards like I do and others, where we make a conscious and determined effort to look at strategies that put women workers in terms of equal and equitable conditions, pay, support and resources as a key and direct and obvious part of our strategies. And that can even go to our company reporting in terms of transparency about pay. It can go to the relationship that we might have with unions. It might go to the fact that, you know, our marketing and our overall approach. I think there has to be some kind of more definitive, definite, purposeful decision-making from people in leadership, whether you are leading families or businesses or communities or MPs. I watched the parliamentary debate this morning and I was disappointed with the lack of strategic foresight, and I thought that there were opportunities for people who hold roles as MPs to be more considered and more aligned in what decisions that are best for our country.
Andrea, yes.
No, I'm happy to go next, and wonderful to follow after Traci. Where I come from is we get and we pay for what we value. And we have an economy that's low wage, low productivity, high rent and high carbon. And so going forward in this new world post-COVID, And women and Māori and Pacifica are on the rough end of all of that. Anytime that we're looking to do something different or bring in an industry transformation plan or spend money on infrastructure or social infrastructure, what we'd really like to see is that lens, that ruler put across and ask, is this going to make us better? Is it going to make us worse, or is it the status quo? And if the answer isn't that it's going to prove the quality of our country, well, then why are we doing it? I mean, we might want to do it as a temporary measure. I mean, quite frankly, we have got quite nasty levels of unemployment coming up. And so there's merit for spending in various ways to help us transition through. But we need to be thinking everything of where do we want to be and what is our path through to transition. And that's on everything. And as far as we can see in the union movement, if you put that lens on everything that we do now, we can't help but being in a better place. And in order for that to happen, it needs to be everyone at the table. It needs to be workers at the table. It needs to be business at the table. It needs to be iwi. It needs to be, because we all bring slightly different lenses, and we are quite a small country, and so there's no reason why we can't bring all these perspectives, because it's all our country, and if the bottom is moved up, we all benefit.
Yep, Kararina.
Yeah, great discussion, great questions. I just want to respond to perhaps a question that's come up regarding civil society involvement. Like today, there's a very, very important bill that's going through, and they're hoping to pass it today that will give huge powers to police and all sorts of things. And it's like, when are we going to stop making these really, really big decisions that will have huge implications on people's lives without making time for the people to speak up for themselves, So I think that's a really key role that civil society has. And I don't think necessarily that those at decision-making tables are taking the time to capitalize on that. So it's kind of like we're still doing, we want to do different, but doing the same thing, but just quicker. You know what I mean? So we're still not involving women in the design of what's needed, in reviewing potential impact and designing what is the sign of success. What is the sign of success? That may look differently to Traci, may look differently to me, to Andrea, but unless we are given the opportunity, we are in a democracy, unless we're given an opportunity to realize that for New Zealand, that we're not doing anything different. We continue on excluding, the loudest gets heard, and we're not doing anything different. So we have to stop. We've worked so hard. We've worked so hard as a nation to keep each other safe. We've made compromises to keep each other safe during this crisis. Give us the benefit of then seeing what it is that duty holders are seeing, and give us the people time to have a say and have an input into that. Because the success is not for duty bearers, the success is for New Zealanders, for all New Zealanders, and it looks different. And the success for the average is not the success for those below that line. When are we going to stop doing this and do different? So this is what I think we need to do different. And civil society, all the diverse entities, communities, the voices they represent must be given an opportunity, a real opportunity to participate in policy design and in reviewing impact and all that sort of stuff, and then looking at the money. Where should the money go? So, in all those stages, I think if we can commit ourselves to doing differently and letting women into those arenas, then we have hope. Otherwise, it's like the honeymoon period. Yeah, it's a great opportunity, but then, after a few while, we just go back to doing the same old, same old. So I mean, the work that the women at this table, those who are listening in, and yourself, Jennifer, is so important. But why is the Ministry for Women not a decision maker, only an influencer? Women should have a say on all of those things. Let's start there. Can we start there in Parliament? Great.
Yeah. Rebecca, do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah. It's an interesting one because Dr. Sumeo, I totally take your point. For us, it's ensuring that everyone else, as a matter of course, thinks about women when they're doing things and thinks about how any policy initiative has a gender impact. Because otherwise, I guess we would be this giant, omnipotent omnibus department doing everything. But I think you're right, and I think that one key way in government, because we are into the really analytical side of things, is we really need to figure out a way to change the discourse away from always being focused on GDP. So and GDP being a really narrow definition of in terms of economic profit. And I think that we've opened a door with this crisis. I think you're right. Every single person in New Zealand has put a lot of effort into maintaining everyone's health. So we can do it. When we put our minds to it, we can say, okay, this social thing matters more. But it's figuring out a way to ensure that we do this as a matter of course, and we do it every day. I mean, everyone waves a flag of Bhutan with its gross national happiness, and I'm not suggesting that we do, or maybe we should have a gross national happiness sort of measure, but some sort of measure that says we value economic, but we also value people. And we have seen it. We've seen it in the public, with stopping work, stopping doing things, not going to playgrounds, things like that. So I think we can. It's just getting it through and figuring out how to do it, which I think we are still probably trying to figure out exactly how we would do that and how to conceptualize it and things. But I think once you have something to measure, then you can always be held to account to it. So if we figure it out and we say we want to measure this and we want to be better at this, then it gives something that people can react to and hold to account, because otherwise we talk about ideas, and ideas are really great, but until we get some action with the ideas, then it's always going to be something that we talk about, but we can't do because there's nothing solid, if that makes. Sorry, it's again, I've wafted into sort of theoretical, but I'm
conscious that we're talking about a lot of like being inclusive of voices, and there's an important question here about our need to acknowledge gender diversity, and that our environment isn't decidedly male and female, and our whawhaini and takatuapu, the non-binary people, are also incredibly vulnerable right now. So if we're thinking about vulnerabilities and picking up on Kararina's point about not resorting to the average and not resorting to the easy categories, if you like, or the categories that are intuitive, that we use as a norm, and then marginalize the other. So picking up on that, how do we become more inclusive in making the policy levers more shift? Not just bringing people to the table and hearing voices. I'm sort of thinking about the levers as well. Cost benefit analysis. How do we actually, how would we ask government to listen or hear all these voices and listen to them, given how many working groups we've had over the last 3 years where diverse voices have sought to have input. I know there's no magic wand here, but just considering diversity beyond the binary male female and beyond that as well. Just wondering, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left, so we really have to be just sort of 1 point per person. So Rebecca, shall I come back to you and you'll be quick and then we'll move around?
Yes, I will be quick. I think for me, and this is a personal challenge, is I think that it's providing advice to government that is what I call real talk, the real talk advice. It's saying, you know what, diversity, you shouldn't need to have an economic bottom line for this. It's the right thing to do. There's a really great article about diversity on boards that I read recently, and it said you've got to take the economic equation out of it, because you know what, it's not about that. We're past that. You need to do this because it's the right thing to do. Hopefully, we're in a sort of a situation now where we can, when we say that, and it really, really matters.
Kia ora, Andrea.
I like to tell Taco what Rebecca just said, but I think I always just keep coming back to we get what we value. And it's important that these voices are at the table and it's included. But yeah, sorry, I don't think I've, but you know, look, I just agree is really what's been said.
Kia ora, Tracy.
Yeah, tau tōku ana ngā mihi kua mihi. You know, Jennifer, I presented to the Epidemic Response Committee. I was one of probably a handful of women. There is a classic example of what's happening in Parliament right now, where women leaders and women's organisations, businesses and groups aren't as well recognised or invited to be part of one of New Zealand's most important conversations right now, which will advise and shape, let's hope, a new economic paradigm for Aotearoa Inc. The fact that we had to petition for more women to be there says everything. This is about people in leadership making decisions and determining that they will put women in work as part of their strategies, policies and priorities, and then properly resourcing that and making policies and protocols to ensure that that occurs and reporting on it.
Kia ora. Kararina, you have the last word.
I agree with everybody. And perhaps just one hint from me is talk to different people. Don't talk to the same people you've consulted with forever. Talk to the different voices, and then yes, we will catch the voices of our female and our trans women and our, you know, our different women. So that's something I try to do. I get given a list and I said, who's missing? Ask who's missing, and you might hear something different. You might hear that voice that isn't the average, and might be able to do better for them. Thank you.
Kia ora. So we are now at 5:01 in the afternoon, and we've covered a wide range of topics, and tomorrow is the big day on resource delivery for all these you know, imaginings that we have for a better world in New Zealand for our and dismantling structural inequalities for our Indigenous people, for all our people, men and women in this community. That's what gender equality is all about. So thank you all, Andrea, Tracy, Kararina and Rebecca, for taking the time to be with us this evening. Thank you to our audience for your 55 questions, of which we have only tapped the top 6 or so. But please be assured to tune in again. We will notify you when our next gender impact analysis webinar is coming up. It won't be far away. And take good care in level 2. Keep your whānau close and stay well. Thank you for joining us. Kia ora.
Thanks for it.